Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. My name is Quentin R. Giles, and on behalf of the Houston Metropolitan Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, we want to welcome you all into Advocacy in Action. Now, tonight is going to be a great night of learning, a great night of really getting immersed in the things that are happening in our state here in Texas. We have an expert guest that we are excited and thrilled to bring you. And we're going to be taking some questions from our panelists and potentially from you, the audience. So we definitely want you all to be engaged, and we definitely want you all to ask all of those pressing and burning questions that you've had. Now, it is my distinct honor to welcome Miss Percy Kabeer, who is the second Vice President and Program of Planning and Development Chair.
Good evening, and welcome to Houston Metropolitan Alumni's Chapter Social Action Team series of continued events, creating critical conversations concerning current controversies. As a chapter, we are proactively involved in educating ourselves as well as the public. So at this time, we are pleased to welcome each and every one of you, as well as our panelists, as we attentively participate and engage while we learn more about the legislative process and how this session will be conducted during this ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So please take time and feel free to share this feed and the information that we're about to receive as we continue to advocate, act, and use the power in our voice. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so I want to take the time to welcome our esteemed guest who is about to give us some great information, Mr. Jason Sabo. He is the founder of Frontier Strategy. Jason has led and assisted efforts to pass legislation and secure appropriations at state capitals across the country for more than 2 decades. Jason knows the issues in politics important to nonprofits and philanthropy, and he knows how to win. Now, that part is important. He knows how to win. He holds a master's degree in history from India University. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you so much to you, Quentin. Thank you so much, Percy. And thank you so much to the women of Delta Sigma Theta for having me. I do hundreds of these speeches every year. And man, I am so honored to be talking to you guys tonight. I just got to say, it means so much. Thank you so much for your interest in what's happening in your Texas legislature. So what we're gonna do tonight is talk about a couple of things. We're gonna talk about Texas politics, and we're gonna talk about how all of us can have a meaningful impact on what's happening here in Austin at the Texas legislature. And as Percy said, this is COVID time. This is an unprecedented moment, and I believe that an unprecedented moment, particularly for the Black community, given that we all know that COVID-19 is disproportionately negatively impacting the people in the Black community. And I think that we need to have a very clear, transparent, and honest conversation about what we all can do this upcoming legislative session to make sure that everyone's voice gets appropriately heard at the Capitol. Now, I've got a PowerPoint presentation for which I'm going to apologize at the outset. I hate doing PowerPoint. I would so much like to be in a room with you all, talking to you in person. PowerPoint is this kind of like stilted conversation, but the reality is I got some slides to show and we'll get there. But I am a Twitter obsessive. Quentin's on Twitter. I don't know who else is. I already follow him. I followed him today. And I was trying to write a tweet about you all, but I ran out of time. But I'm going to urge everyone, if you really are interested in this stuff, and you're interested in what's happening in Texas politics, to follow along on Twitter. My Twitter feed is at the bottom there. That's just one way to stay informed. But I urge you all to really kind of pay attention to what's happening at the Capitol, and Twitter is an easy way to do that. That's my little self-promotional plug at the outset. So let's get into the fun stuff. So now, when I think about the Texas legislature, I went to the smallest public high school in Indiana. I'm not what you call a real smart guy. So I got to break things down and make them kind of like in a way that I can personally understand them. And I like to think of things as, kind of as pictures. I'm a lobbyist. And as you will see here, there's a reason I'm not an artist. because I can't draw. But I want, and thinking about this, I want you all to think about the legislative process kind of like a factory. There's a factory in Austin that receives materials and produces a product. Next slide, Paulette. And what we need to understand is that place in Austin is a law factory. It produces the laws that define every aspect, negatively or positively, of our lives. The materials that come into that factory, the raw materials, the iron, the steel, right, the copper, whatever it might be, are ideas, they're data that become pieces of legislation and individual bills. That's the material. What happens in the law factory ultimately determines all the stuff that defines our lives. That's the product that's produced. Next slide, please, Paulette. What I'm asking you guys to do is, like a laser, focus on the law factory. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because that law factory is the Capitol in Austin, in which I've worked for about 20 years. And I can assure you that the people like those on, like me and those on the call, we don't have a place at the Capitol. There's no like chair reserved for us. If we want a place at the Capitol, we have to go there and take a chair and either bring our own damn chair or find a chair that's empty and sit in it and stay there. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So next slide, please, Paulette. Now, I'm a child advocate. Most of my work is around children's issues. So I would like to kind of like all of us to take a step back from the idea of controversies, because I don't think that anything I'm going to say tonight is at all controversial. I think that everything I'm saying tonight is the least controversial stuff possible, because I believe fundamentally to my core that all of our kids, and not just some political, mouthy mouth, but all of our kids really do deserve an equal opportunity. But the reality is that when we as a society, or we as a state in this specific instance, choose to interact with those kids, everything that we choose to do is a conscious decision. Nothing that happens in politics, nothing that happens in politics, nothing that happens in law, nothing that happens in your Texas legislature happens by chance. Everything happens for a calculated reason. And we have to understand why those calculations are being made and what their impact is. But we also have to make it real. And the reality is, when kids go to school, the kids that I work for on behalf of every day, or I purport to represent, they need basic healthcare and dental care. How can they learn if they don't have basic healthcare? Texas is number 50 in how we insure our children. I've been doing this for more than 20 years. You know where we were 20 years ago? 50. That's absolutely grotesque and unacceptable in terms of how we insure our children. Kids often go to school hungry, and the only meal that they get is the meal they eat in that school cafeteria, or hopefully at the school sending home additional food. And during COVID, what about those kids? Millions of our kids don't have reliable access to the internet. If we've moved online for school, what about them? Additionally, millions of our kids come from Black communities where the infant mortality and the maternal mortality and morbidity, which means injury, sickness, illness, rates are 2.5 times the Black community rates of maternal mortality and infant mortality are 2.5 times the rates of those in my neighborhood. That is grotesque and unacceptable. Additionally, we have the reality in which not only is there gross disparities between school districts, but there's gross disparities within school districts. And all of this, of course, happening in a context in which our children are experiencing very real trauma as a result of COVID-19. Next slide, please, Paulette. Now, if you're going to really understand how to influence Texas politics, you have to really understand why the people of the legislature do the things that they do. And they do them because we tell them to do those things. It's a representative democracy, believe it or not. And the reality is which that often we don't really understand why our representatives and senators are doing the things that they're doing. But ultimately, they're doing those things because we, the people, are telling them those are the things that are most important to us. And if you look at what the most important issue in the minds of the people of Texas a month before the last election were, obviously, people care about coronavirus. But if you look at that part, I'm not partisan. I don't have the luxury of being partisan. I'm just going to tell it like it is. I'm a lobbyist. I can't say I love Democrats. I love Republicans. I got to say I love them all. So you know what? I love them all. There, I said it. Now I'm going to tell the truth. And the reality in all of it is that there's a distinct difference in how people of both parties are viewing what's happening around us. And the reality is that people who are Democrats are a lot more concerned about what's happening with regards to coronavirus. And if you look at what's kind of motivating Republican voters, you'll see that it's immigration, it's the border, it's the economy, right? It's moral decline. Define that for me. I have a strange feeling it might be part of that. But the reality in all of this is that, and I appreciate that I've got Percy over there smiling or not smiling as my kind of gauge as my jokes are flying. But, if you look at this, it's kind of clear that if you're a Democrat, right? Democrats are always called, people always say, I don't want to be a member of an organized political party. I want to be a Democrat, right? Because the Democrats seem like they're all over the map. But if you look here, look at immigration, border security, political corruption, unemployment, the economy, healthcare, moral decline. Think about how many of those things you have to add up just to equal the Republican interest in immigration and border security. As long as a Republican political candidate is talking about immigration and border security, they're going to win, right? Next slide, please, Paulette. And this isn't just this year. This is last year. This is every year. This 2019 chart, you could track that bad boy back a decade, and it's still going to be the same thing. And in many ways, I think the 2019 chart, minus the COVID, is actually more instructive of kind of where we are politically as a state and what really matters to people. And what really matters to people, at least if you're a Republican, is brown people, right? And and that's just real. It's just there. And the problem the Democrats have is if they want to equal that enthusiasm, basically around brown people scare me, they got to add up immigration, border security, guns, corruption, education, healthcare, and they're kind of almost where you are if you just say brown people scare me. So for the Democrats, it's a much harder deal because they have to stack up all these micro constituencies, right? Versus having one consistent message. And just so you know, we spend $1 billion of state money, not federal money, Texas state money on border stuff. Why do we spend that money on that instead of maternal health care? Why do we spend that money on that instead of reducing infant mortality in Black communities, which, as I said earlier, is 2.5 times the rate it is in white communities? That's why, right here, because Republican politicians are being told that's what people care about. Now, next slide, please, Paulette. Now, if you think about Texas, it's a big place. I mean, we got what? We got 14 people on the call. Y'all are in Houston, right? That's the biggest city, and that's the fourth largest city in the United States. You guys are 20% of the Texas legislature. That's a lot. You guys can have more political power than anybody else in Texas, right there in Houston. But you know what? You only got 20% of the votes. 20% gets you a whole lot of nothing, right? So what we got to start talking about doing is how the women of Delta Sigma Theta Houston get together with the women of Delta Sigma Theta Dallas and Austin and San Antonio and Tyler and Amarillo and El Paso and Lubbock and Brownsville. I can keep going if you want. But the reality is we're all like so focused on our own little reality that we're missing the big picture. And the big picture is, if we don't start working together, what we've seen ain't gonna change. The reality of being number 50 in uninsured children, the reality of 2.5 times as many Black babies dying as white babies will not change if we do not choose to differentiate. Basically, if we don't choose to rise above being local and really start to think about the big picture. Paulette, next slide, please, ma'am. Now, this last legislative session, everybody was like, you know what? People are sick of it. People are going to repudiate the madness. People are going to say, I've had enough. Personally, I'm going to take a moment here and I'm going to say to the women of Delta Sigma Theta, and I'm going to say to all the women of the Divine Nine, thank you for saving the world. Because when I look at the last election, that's what y'all did. Now, be very, very clear about that. And and a lot of us, myself included, thought that there was going to be a repudiation of the racism, of all of it. It didn't happen in the Texas legislature. A lot of us thought that that blue column that you see in 2021 was going to be enough that it would equal 76. And in Texas politics, 76 equals power in the House of Representatives. Personally, I was hoping that a woman from Houston, a woman named Sinfroni Thompson, the first Democrat to announce for Speaker of the House of Representatives back in the day when people thought that was possible, and the second longest standing member of the Texas legislature, and a Black woman, mind you, from Houston. I was hoping she was going to be Speaker. You know what? My hopes didn't become reality. And the reality is we have probably another decade, and I'm going to repeat that a third time, another decade of Republican leadership in this state for a lot of the reasons we're going to talk about over the course of the next few minutes. But when you look at the Texas House of Representatives, look back in time, jump in the time machine with me and go back to 2009. What happened in 2008? President Barack Obama was elected, and there was a tidal wave surge of votes that came in to bring him into power, many of which were Black. You look at the next election, what happened in the next election? And the reality is that in the next election, the Republicans, wait, my color scheme appears to be skewed here. Someone made the Republicans blue and the Democrats orange. I need to change that slide because the reality is that the Republicans in 2011 almost had a supermajority in the Texas House of Representatives. Why? Because Texans came out to vote against Barack Obama in 2010. If I were going to look at the crystal ball and look at 2012, I would say that we're probably going to see something like that again as Texas Republicans come out again and vote against President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Next slide, please. Now, when you look at the Texas Senate, it's kind of a different story. Democrats have consistently gained power there. But the reality is that our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick from Houston, is the president of the Senate. He's very conservative, very Republican. And his kind of perspective is that he can set the rules, and he will. So despite the fact that the Democrats are gaining in numerical power, they're still essentially the backbenchers and won't have a lot of political power next session. Next slide, please. Now, when you think about where we are, a lot of Democrats thought that this whole deal was going to play out a lot differently. A lot of them were thinking, you know what? This is the session. This is the election. The 2020 is the year that the Democrats seize control. Why 2020 is so important is that every 10 years we do the census. We all filled out the form, right? That's used to draw the legislative maps that ultimately determine who represents who. And a lot of Democrats were thinking that 2020, if they were able to win the House, they'd be able to control that process. They didn't pull it off. And now, like a white boy rapper, they're sitting back like, whoa, all right, stop, collaborate, and listen. Because the reality is they read things completely wrong. They were tone deaf to what was happening in the state around them. And it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that they ain't no vanilla ice no more. Because the reality is, whatever we're doing isn't working. Next slide, please. Now, I think it's important that if we're going to talk about Texas politics, we talk about who is in power right now. And that guy down there on the bottom with the microphone, that's Greg Abbott. He's the governor of Texas. Up at the top there, that's Dan Patrick in the top left-hand corner. He's lieutenant governor of Texas. And back off in the corner there, off to his right, your left, is a woman named Jane Nelson. She's the chairwoman of the Senate Finance Committee, probably the most single powerful woman in Texas politics. Additionally, the guy in the middle there, Dade Phelan, who is from Beaumont, Southeast Texas, the incoming speaker of the Texas House of Representatives. The guy on the right is what you get when you Google white man in a suit, because there you have it, a bunch of white men in suits. And that's your state's political leadership right there, to be very clear about that. Okay, next slide, please, Paulette. Now, let's talk about what's about to happen and what the timeline and all of this stuff at the Capitol is. We know that the November election happened. Our president may not be hip to that, but it happened. And 6 days later, members of the legislature began filing bills. So there are already bills being filed, hundreds of bills. If you're waiting to January to start paying attention to what your Texas legislature is doing, it's too late. The game is afoot. It's happening now. And they'll begin on January 12th, and they'll be done on May 31st. And then we'll go into the veto period where the governor has a chance to veto bills. But the reality is that normally, under normal circumstances, minus a global pandemic, we would be talking about redistricting in every 10 years, we redraw the maps, right? Which is why your legislative districts in Houston kind of look like a toupee in a lot of ways, right? Houston, like Dan Crenshaw, US Congressman, his district is so gerrymandered that it literally looks like a toupee on Houston. And I urge you to look at it because it is. But if you look at where we are through districting, because everything about the census has been delayed, redistricting probably isn't going to happen until this summer. So the legislature will adjourn in May and then come back almost 100% sure for a special session. So 2021 is going to be an unusually active year for people who are interested in monitoring the legislature. And I think that we need to understand, though, that the 2021 legislature has absolutely nothing to do with 2021, and ultimately everything to do with 2022 and potentially 2024. Greg Abbott's running for president, and he hasn't announced it yet, but Greg Abbott is running for president. The next two legislative sessions will be defined by his presidential aspirations. And if you look at what he's talking about already, I think we've got a kind of a window, and we'll talk about that in a minute, as to what that looks like. And Texas, among other states, has among the earliest primary elections. And the reason that we have March, some states don't have their primaries until like September. Why do we have primaries in March? It's because the incumbents want to get, the Republican incumbents essentially want to deny people who are running against them in their own party and from the other party as much time as possible in which to raise money to run an electoral campaign. That's why we have one of the earliest primaries of any state in the United States. And then ultimately we're leading in all of this to the November 8th election. So Paulette, next slide, please. Now, when you look at what next session is going to look like, there are a few things, and I know that you are you will have specific issues that you want to talk about. So as much as possible, I'm trying to address those here. And I do think that next session, we're going to have, because of COVID, we're going to have a conversation, I think, about health disparities that we may not have had before. If for no other reason, then it's very clear that Black Texans, Latino Texans are disproportionately dying from COVID. Why? Because of a whole bunch of factors that are all policy choices, not all of them, many of them that are policy choices that are being made at the Capitol. Black Texans are disproportionately less likely to have health insurance. Black Texans are disproportionately more likely to be low income, particularly women. And when we look at that, we look at these health disparities, infant mortality and maternal mortality. Think of it this way. In Texas, we have chosen, we're one of a very small handful of states that have chosen not to expand our Medicaid program under Obamacare. And in doing so, a very clear, people who die because we chose not to expand Medicaid. Black women die because we chose not to expand Medicaid. Repeat, Black women die because we chose not to expand Medicaid at a rate that's 2.5 times the rate of Latinas and of white women. If we had in Texas chosen to expand Medicaid, right now, 55% of the births in Texas are paid for by Medicaid. Medicaid is a huge federal, and state healthcare funding program. And who does Medicaid pay for? It pays for low-income babies, particularly Black and brown low-income babies, and low-income old people, white old people. So Medicaid is a program that pays for low-income Black and brown babies and low-income old white people. And that's kind of the reality. Like, the nursing homes in Texas rely upon Medicaid. We all know what happens with our parents as they get older. And a lot of them ultimately end up on Medicaid. And a lot of them ultimately are having care provided by Medicaid. Those kinds of health disparities are going to get more attention because of COVID in 2021, I hope, than ever before. Additionally, we're going to have a huge conversation about how COVID-19 is impacting the state budget and public education. The state budget, there will be budget cuts in this upcoming legislative session. 85% of the Texas state budget is education, health, and human services. They don't have anything to cut. It's not like there's inefficiency or fat or gross incompetence to cut at this point. I mean, they cut that 20 years ago. At this point, if you're cutting in Texas, you need a power saw because it's deep into the bone, man. And I mean, and the reality is if you're cutting in the state budget, it's gonna be the health and human services, and it's gonna be the public education. And we know that public education, we have 300,000 conservative estimates of kids that were registered for school last year that we don't even know where they are. I mean, where are those kids? They're not in rich white neighborhoods. They're in Black neighborhoods. They're in Hispanic neighborhoods. And I mean, that's just that's just the reality of it. And I just want to call it out. And if you think about virtual learning and broadband access, I was talking to a guy named James White the other day. He's a state representative, a Black Republican. Yes, they do exist. It's like, and James White and I were talking, and he said something to me that just blew me away. He represents this district that's like East Texas, right? Like, way country. And he was like, Jason, we got iPads. We got beautiful iPads. We just don't have a signal. Think about that. We're moving online and we're thinking that we're doing kids right. And some kids don't even have internet access. And some kids are on class with their teacher for Zoom 7 hours a day. That's gross. It's gross inequity and it's gross disparity. And shame, shame, shame on us. Shame on us. If you look at COVID also, we got to remember that when kids do come back to school, particularly low-income kids, they're going to be coming with all kinds of additional needs, mental health needs that they're going to have addressed if they're going to be able to get on path and get level and get going for opportunity going into the future.
So that's a good point to jump in on, Jason.
Sorry, I'm sorry if I'm going long, man.
No, this is all great stuff. All great stuff. How do we take that? Because you were just dropping gems and letting us know what the real issues are and the disparities that we're starting to see. So how do we advocate? What is your suggestion for that? Earlier, you said it's very important for, Delta Sigma Theta Houston to pair it with Delta Sigma Theta Lufkin and Dallas and San Antonio. So that's on the foundation, right? But what more can we do to advocate in this time?
All right, we have till 8 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
All right, now I'm gonna, let's ditch the PowerPoint, Paulette. Let's get rid of that. I mean, I've done my charts, I've done my stuff. I don't want to do. Quentin's right. Let's break into this. Let's talk. Here's what we do. I mean, the reality is the legislature is coming back in January. The first 60 days of the session, they're not going to let anybody in there. If you want to go into the Capitol, you're going to have to be there for a reason. And if you want to go, you're going to have a COVID test. So I'm going to be walking around like this, I'm assuming, for like the first, basically January and February, this is going to be me. And, the reality in all this is that everything in the Capitol is moving outside the Capitol. And I would say that the women on this call right now, there is no better, you've never had a better opportunity politically than you do right now. Because, I was Googling, I was direct messaging today with Boris Miles, state senator from Houston, with his chief of staff. And I was reaching out to Camille saying, basically, your boss hit a home run yesterday at this Health and Human Services Committee hearing on COVID stuff. He was talking about the racial disparities. He was talking about the fact that that we need to be ahead of the curve on this, or we're going to have the vaccine being distributed in communities unequal, without equity, which simply cannot happen. And Senator Miles needs to know that y'all got his back. He needs to know that you're watching. He needs to know that you care. He needs to know that you're pushing, that you're with him. You're saying, Senator, you're saying the right stuff. Go for it. Because that's what we need right now.
So how do we make him know? How is that? If he's going to be or a representative's going to, be there, how do we let them know? Because that's a part of advocacy, right? How do we let our representatives know that we have their back so that they can go into the charge? And when you answer, and after you answer that, we're going to have Marissa Jones come in and ask a question as well.
So Quentin, to your point, how many of you all are following Senator Miles on Facebook? This is a Facebook event. How many of you all invited Senator Miles to participate in tonight's event? He should be here right now. Why do you have a 50-year-old white dude? You should have Senator Miles.
You're so fun. Because you're so fun.
Senator Miles, what do you mean? I mean, come on, dude. I'm this Hungarian guy from Indiana. I mean, seriously. I mean, I do think that you need Delta Sigma Theta alone. 5 calls to a legislative office change policy. Delta Sigma Theta statewide, if you all had a single issue that you cared about this session, one thing, don't think you can change everything in the world. Unfortunately, you can't. Pick one thing you passionately care about, and you make sure on Twitter, on Facebook is so big to politicians. Okay. Twitter, Facebook, go after them on that. Say, we got your back. Thank you for saying this stuff. We're here.
Got it. Good. So we're going to bring in Marissa Jones, who is the Physical and Mental Health Committee co-chair, to ask a question about health disparities.
All right. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you all?
Good.
Okay, so just to kind of talk in addition to what you've already spoke on briefly, the access to care, and also Texas' decision not to expand Medicaid and where we are with mental health. According to the 2021 State of Mental Health American Report, Texas is basically coming in dead last in overall access to mental health care right now. So with that being said, about 1 out of 7 children with depression are receiving treatment, which is leaving a very vast majority untreated. And these numbers are carrying over into our young adults as well as to our adult population, with an extreme emphasis on our inmates and our prisoners that are not receiving their care as well. So basically, my question for you is, are you aware of any upcoming Texas legislation that's going to address this pre-existing epidemic that we already had in relations to not having the access to the mental health care that is now coinciding with our current pandemic of COVID-19, especially with our lack thereof of the expansion of Medicaid here in Texas?
Quentin, you want me to go?
Yeah, that's for you, Jason.
So Marissa, first off, thank you for calling it an epidemic. Thank you for calling it out for what it is. And for me, right now, I think the one thing that we can all do, and multiple bills have already been filed on this is something that can happen this session. This is not, look, I've been doing this for 20 years. I don't send people down the yellow brick road to Oz unless they can win. And something that we can win on this session is the maternal mortality and morbidity piece. Right now, because we didn't expand Medicaid, if your coverage for postpartum depression ends at 60 days after birth, right? If we'd expanded Medicaid, it would be 12 months. That's the differential. That's what we can win this session, Marissa, is the 10-month differential. We can do that. I would urge all of you you have serious mental health champions in Houston. Chairman Garnet Coleman, who's filed legislation for me already this session, one of my personal heroes, is the author of the Sandra Bland Act, for context, is one of the strongest voices for 20 years. He's from Houston on mental health issues. Just like Senator Miles, Representative Chairman Coleman needs to know that you all have his back and say, Senator, Representative, we got you. Thank you. Go, go, go. And I think that the more they hear from us, just because your representative agrees with you doesn't mean you don't need to communicate with them. And I always remind people of that. We think that just because somebody's like a liberal Democrat, we got it. They're done. We don't need to worry about it. They're politicians. They respond to their constituents. Where the wheel is squeaking is where the grease is applied. Squeak, squeak, squeak. And if you're going to squeak on anything this session on physical and mental health, make it that closing that 10-month gap coverage, Marissa. I believe we can do that in 2021.
That's good. That's good stuff. It's constant communication with our elected officials.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Constant.
Yeah. I mean, they work for us, right? Our tax dollars fund.
Yes.
Yeah.
They
So
paid by us.
Yeah, that's perfect. So next we're going to bring in Christy Love. She is the Caldwell Elementary School principal, and she is going to ask a question regarding the digital divide.
Hi. So you mentioned earlier regarding the issues that we've seen facing in public schools. We know that there is a huge divide, not just with getting the technology to the students, but also with the access to technology, not just in the schools, but also in the home. And an area that really has affected the schools for us is funding. How are the school districts going to be funded in order to get things out? Another issue that we have is the students who have not returned. In my district in Houston ISD, we're looking at anywhere between 10 to 12,000 students who did not return this school year, which actually, as you know, affects funding. And so I wanted to know, is there anything that is coming up, or what can educators do so our voice can be heard, so that we can get the support when it comes to the lack of students who are coming in? We know that right now the districts are being held harmless due to attendance and our budgets. But in January of 2021, that's not going to happen again. So we're going to be held accountable for our attendance rates, which also will again decrease funding for the schools, which will help hold us would be harmful to us as far as our budget is concerned. So really just looking to see what legislation is coming up, or what can we do in order to address those needs and gaps.
Ma'am, first off, I need to say a principal with the last name Love is the most amazingly named person on the human planet. Oh my God, that is the coolest thing I've ever heard. I wish you'd been my elementary school principal. Point number two, you hit the nail on the head, Christy. I mean, what we're looking at now, and unfortunately there's a very partisan split about this, is how we fund our public schools. Are we going to fund them based upon attendance, or are we going to fund them based upon enrollment? And that is a huge divide, because when we look at where we are right now, we're talking about kids who haven't returned to school, not because they don't want to be there or their parents don't want to be there, but perhaps because the world has kind of blown up. And we need to recognize that some families have greater challenges in dealing with and navigating the new world order, which is not permanent, but which we are confronted with right now. And the reality is, going into this next session, there's going to be a huge philosophical debate, ultimately, about whether or not we trust Christy Love. Because from my perspective, there's no one I know who I've known for more than, 35 seconds, that I trust more than Christy Love, because I believe that Christy Love is filled with love, and her whole attitude about her approach to the students is that she of course wants them to be in her campus. So why wouldn't you fund her based upon enrollment? Because she wants all the children to be there. But then there's another perspective that says, I don't trust Christy Love. I don't trust Christy Love to actually care about whether or not those kids are there. Therefore, I want to fund her school based upon whether or not she can count every single nose every single day. And you know what? That ain't reality. And I trust Christy. So as we're looking into this next legislative session, I hope that we can all get behind the idea that we should be funding our schools based upon who is supposed to be there pre-pandemic, not who has actually been able to navigate the maze to get there during a pandemic.
Good, good. I have a question, because you said something earlier, but you didn't push all the way in. So really quickly, you said that the Texas legislature, due to COVID, will be moving outside, and this is in relation of how do we apply pressure. And you said this is the perfect time. Are you saying, when you say outside, meaning out of the Capitol building for COVID precautions? And so literally, depending on where you are on the Capitol, they are in visible eyesight, or they can hear you a little more quickly if you are, let's say, 6 to 10 feet apart, stating how you feel. Is that what you were alluding to?
6 to 10, dude. We're talking like...
Well, we try to follow the CDC guidelines over here. So I'm just asking the question.
I'm talking pre-pandemic. Just for context, this week, there were 40 fundraisers in private clubs surrounding the Capitol, in which lobbyists were writing checks. I made a contribution to Sinfonia Thompson's fundraiser, but did not feel comfortable going because of the pandemic. There were 40 of those fundraisers in which probably hundreds of lobbyists attended and contributed probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in the last 3 or 4 days. None of that happened inside the Capitol. None of that happened within the public view. All of that happened within private buildings and private clubs. How are the women of Delta Sigma Theta going to play in that role? You're not. They don't want you there. They don't want you there. Period. Right? So what needs to happen instead, and so they don't want you in the private clubs where they're raising all their money, and they've locked you out of the building. What are you supposed to do? There's like literal 2 blocks on Congress Avenue in Austin that separates those two. What are you supposed to do? Have a bake sale every afternoon on like a 10th in Congress so you can talk to your senators? No. I mean, that's what I'm saying, Quentin, is that if they're going to change the system to keep us out, we got to hit them where they live. They don't live in Austin. And the reality is we've always, everybody outside of Austin has always kind of played, it's the reality, everything, they all come to Austin and do their deal, right? And then they go home. But the reality is they're all coming to Austin right now and they're doing their deal, but we can't watch it because we're locked out, which means that when they scurry home, we damn sure better be watching them and telling them what we want if we can't tell them what we want inside the building.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, we're going to bring in the Economic Development Committee co-chair, Jamie Humphrey, and she's asking a question regarding small businesses, and I believe specifically minority and women-owned.
Hi, Jason. We know that in the PPP program, the Payroll Protection Program, that minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses were basically shut out from the funding. What, if anything, is the legislature prepared to do to help rectify that situation?
Man, did you hit my hot button? I do a lot of work on early childhood education. Who owns child care centers?
Women.
Who owns child care centers in Texas and America? Women of color, Black women, Hispanic women. That's who owns child care centers. And what keeps the economy running? What allows people to go to work? Child care centers, Black women, Hispanic women who run those child care centers. Those are small businesses, and they're getting screwed by all kinds of ways. And my attitude is, when you think about where we are with the economic development stuff, we can't change it all. I mean, I got my deal, right? But for you all, if you all were gonna like go after one kind of sector of the economy that is seriously hardcore Black women-owned businesses, childcare, because they are hurting. They're going to go out of business. And when those businesses disappear, I don't care if it's a center-based childcare center or a family day home where you have a woman who might take care of like 3 or 4 kids in her home. Very common. Federal funding allows that to happen in Texas for thousands of women who are providers of the care, let alone the women who are receiving the care. That's a big deal. And Symphonia Thompson from Houston has filed a bill specifically related to the child care workforce. I helped write it. And we've included specific language around addressing racial disparities in the compensation. It's in the bill, racial disparities in compensation for childcare workers. So we want to go out, we want to know why it is that Black women are paid disproportionately low for the work that they're doing versus other providers, for example. So I do think that it's a huge issue, and the kind of the angle that I think we should go at it at is childcare providers.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. Next, we're going to bring in the Social Action Committee member, Ms. Jasmine Turner, to ask a question regarding police reform in the Texas legislature. Is Jasmine there? If not, I'll ask a question regarding.
No, I'm here. Sorry, I was having issues getting off of mute. I thought I was off mute, and that was not the reality. Hey, Jason, how are you doing?
Great.
Thank you again for joining us this evening. So I did some research yesterday, just trying to get a feel for, have there been any pre-filings related to police reform, the criminal justice system? And what I found is, I found a map, and when you clicked on different representatives and senators, I saw a lot of fragmented bills. Like, one bill would be based off of police chokeholds. One bill would be on bail reform. There's another bill on something different. Is there a strategy for these different representatives tackling certain things on their own? I know before you mentioned a coalition. It doesn't seem like our representatives are working together, but also maybe there's a strategy behind it that we're not aware of. Is it better for us to try to push for something that's very comprehensive and fail versus doing these very small wins that just kind of tick down some of the issues that we're seeing?
Okay. All right, you asked me like 2 big questions there.
Sorry.
Incrementalism or not, and the police stuff. So I'm going to address the police stuff first, and then the incrementalism stuff. Republicans won this last legislative session because they convinced Texans that there were going to be riots of Black people in large Texas cities. I just said it. I will say it again if I have to. That was their political strategy, and it won. Period. So if I'm a Texas Republican and I feel and I realize that I have this winning political strategy of demonizing someone in my state, you know what? I might just go into this next legislative session and want to double down on that, especially if I were wanting to run for a higher office or wanting to run for president. So my big worry this session is not so much whether or not the Democrats, who do have a comprehensive plan, the George Floyd Act, it's of anything they're doing this session, the Democratic caucus, particularly in the House, and even in the Senate on this one, they are aligned on this. They are aligned on this. I will give them credit for that. And they have come up with a plan, and it's good. I'm happy to share it with you, Jasmine. But the reality is that Republican candidates have decided that kind of an unnamed negative pushback to BLM is good politics. They've decided that. And I think that we all need to know that. And to your point about incrementalism versus going for the whole, the big kahuna. Let's be real, man. I've been a lobbyist in Texas for 20 years. Every session, I pass small bills that add up to small bills. And I've convinced myself over 2 decades that I'm getting something done. I've convinced myself that by being incrementalist, by not really saying what I think, by not really calling it out for what it is, that we could make small progress, and that was enough. But remember what I said at the outset. When I started this 20 years ago, we were number 50 in children's health insurance. And today we are number 50 in children's health insurance. I'm tired of incrementalism. I'm tired of not saying what I think. I'm tired of not calling it out. And, and I embrace, recognize, wallow in my privilege. I ain't stupid. But you know what? I feel because of it that I've got this crazy responsibility. This ain't on you. This is not on the women of Delta Sigma Theta. This is on people like me. And I don't know how to do it. I need your help. I need y'all to tell me what to do, because God, I don't know what to do. Just sorry.
We'll table to see, if there's that coalition building right there.
I'm gonna do a therapy session when we get off.
Yeah, that may be, well, I have a background in social work. I may have to walk you through.
No, that's why I said it.
Okay, so we are actually going to open it up. We have some amazing questions from the Facebook live chat. Also, if you're on Facebook right now and you are enjoying this and you are finding real value, because there's a lot of value here, please share this to your profiles as well so that other people can get in on this amazing conversation. Barbara Ann Williams from the Facebook Live says, and we kind of touched on it a little bit, but we want to get very specific. What has been done locally for police reform in Houston, considering Breonna's law has been passed in Kentucky?
Yeah, man, that's a good question. And I wish I knew Houston politics better than I do. And I just don't. But I kind of look around the state and, I'll be honest, I've worked with Sylvester Turner when he was in the legislature. I have a lot of respect for Sylvester Turner. And, you look at Eric Johnson in Dallas, another Black mayor. We have 2 large Texas cities now. The 2 biggest cities in Texas have Black mayors. And I look at what's happening. Jerry, I don't know if you all know Jerry Hawkins in Dallas or not. He's kind of my touchstone in Dallas. And I kind of look where he is on what's happening in Dallas versus what I'm seeing in Houston. And I do feel like Houston's moving in the right direction. In effect, I do feel, I don't know. I will defer to you all. And I'm sorry,
Well, I'll come in and help you out a little bit. I know with Houston, our mayor here has assembled a council to kind of give him advice, tips on what the police should do. There's been criticism, as you know, you've worked in this policy realm. Criticisms on both sides that this committee is performative and has no teeth. Others says that this committee is actually doing great work and came back with a lot of great suggestions. But to the asker's point, as far as something as transformative as Breonna's Law in Kentucky, that's not something that we've seen here in Houston just yet. But I think I would agree with you that I think we're on the right track to do that. Nikki Williams in the Facebook chat asks, so how do you move past the stigma and how do you move past the blind eye from your point of view? And I think she's talking about when you said you're tired of incrementalism. That's when I noticed that comment popped up, and that you want to just say what it is and understanding, your privilege. But I do think, to add on to that, we're moving into a space where people are just saying what they feel because it has not been said so long. So I think her question about how do we move past that stigma? How do others get to where you are and just ready to say what it is so we can attack the issue?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't. I'm like making this up as I go along. I'm just gonna be real, man. I'm just like, my kind of attitude in all of this right now is, if we're not willing to put it all out right now, with this moment where everything about our society has been laid bare, I don't think we could have had the conversation we're having right now without the pandemic. I don't think so.
Yeah.
And, and I'm gonna, I want to get the vaccine. I'm a vaccine nut. Please get the vaccine. I'm so excited about the vaccine. And I know the historical racism. I know the history. Please get the vaccine. But that said, I look at it and I'm just like, if not for the pandemic, would we be having this kind of a conversation right now? I don't know. But I hope that we're all going to use this opportunity, particularly people like me, to really step back and call it out and own it and be honest about it. And I don't know what it's going to take other people to do that. And I don't even know if I'm doing it right. Who am I to tell other people how to do it at this point?
Yeah, well, I think that's a part of it. You're making it up as you go. You don't know what you don't know until you know the thing, right? On the other side of it. So maybe that was the answer. So give yourself a little credit.
Well, I don't know though. All I'm trying to do is put myself out there, Quentin, and as honestly and genuinely as I can. And I'm hoping that somebody strips it down for me, man, because I really want to get it right.
Yeah. Absolutely. We have another question that I'll just put it out there from Carolyn Williams in the Facebook chat. She asks, will there be any, or do you know if there's going to be any traction on various pieces of legislation filed by Rep. Ron Reynolds regarding the same day voters registration and straight party voting? And is straight party voting on track to come back?
Like, I think that's a really interesting question, because think about voter suppression. When we think about voter suppression, we think about it in terms of a poll tax. We kind of think of Jim Crow, right? We know what voter suppression looks like, but it's much more devious in the 21st century than it used to be. And it's not why is Lena Hidalgo your county judge? Ed Emmett, not a bad guy, Republican, but why did Lena Hidalgo win that race? Because of straight ticket voting. Because so many people were disgusted with Donald Trump, they went to the polls in 2018 and said, Democrat, right? The Republicans knew that. So they made sure that you didn't have the opportunity to do that in 2020. That's why when you went to the poll for the first time, you couldn't push the button that said straight ticket Democrat. They took that away from you. Is that voter suppression? That's a debatable point. I believe that it is. And therefore, to answer the question, no, that bill has a 0% chance of passing, because they won't let it pass, because it would be contrary to their own political self-interest.
So with that, you said a lot. We want to know what are some bills that you know of that we really need to be focused on, that we need to be, now that you've given us a few tips of letting our representatives know we have their back. That's a part of our advocacy. That's a part of putting our action into practice. What are some major bills, major priorities coming up that we need to be looking out for?
Remember this chart that I put up, this kind of picture that I put up at the outset about the law factory? For 20 years, I've passed bills about children's issues. For 20 years, I've been moving bills through that system. And I look at myself 20 years later and I was like, you're an idiot. Why did you spend 20 years moving bills through the system when you could have been tinkering with the system itself, right? I urge all of you, there's a bill that's been filed by Royce West, Black Senator Dallas, and Garnet Coleman, Black Representative Houston. Same bill, Houston, Dallas. It does happen, they do agree. Every once in a while, believe it or not, Houston and Dallas embrace and love each other. And this is one of those moments where it's Senate Bill 108, House Bill 710. And what it does is it creates what is called a racial disparity impact statement. So what the bill would do is, at any point as a bill is moving through the process before it becomes a law, the legislature can say, time out, we want to research whether or not what impact that bill will have on racial disparities among children in Texas. All the bill does. And what we're trying to do is, instead of moving bills through the system, change the system that moves bills through. Because if we're going to make the kind of broader impact that we're trying to make, we got to start thinking systemically, not about individual pieces of legislation. Senate Bill 108, Royce West, House Bill 710, Garnet Coleman.
Gotcha. And this one is just for fun, real quick. Somebody said in the chat, they want to be a lobbyist now, I guess, after watching you. So real quick, let us know, how do you become a lobbyist? The people want to know.
You make a lot of really, really bad choices in your life for a lot of years. I'm a lobbyist, I'm a registered lobbyist, but I'm kind of a different cat in all this, right? All my clients are nonprofit organizations. I'm the only person, I always tell people, when I decided to become a lobbyist, I had a choice. I could either look at one side of the road where everybody looked the same and was the same, or I could look at the other side of the road where there was absolutely nobody and you could be completely your own deal. And I opted for the other side of the road. And I'm a lobbyist only because I go to the Texas Ethics Commission and pay $1,000 a year to register as a lobbyist. That's the only difference. You are also lobbyists. You're not registered, but that doesn't mean you do not have a moral, ethical, personal, faith-based. I don't care what brings you to the legislature. I don't care what makes you care about this stuff. Please care about this stuff. And please let your representatives and senators know that you're watching their every move.
Mm-hmm. And so, for clarification, to that, there's been a question asked about, how can people meet their representatives in this legislature? Because again, and I think we might be stuck on you saying they're moving outside. People are wanting to know, if they so choose, can they go to Austin and view the legislature outside as they conduct business, because they'd be outside due to COVID-19?
Under normal circumstances, yes.
Okay.
Under normal circumstances, I would be like, all right, load the buses up, ladies. We're coming to Austin. We're having a cookout at my house. We'll start here at the cookout, and then we'll all go down to the Capitol. We'd have a big old party, right? If you haven't watched Steve McQueen's new series on Amazon Prime and you haven't seen the second one, oh my God, it's amazing. And it's all about a party, and you need to watch it, because that's the kind of party we would have if you were in Austin, but you will not be here. You will have to do this from afar. So what I'm saying, Quentin, is that these people come home. They don't live in Austin. Mm-hmm. They live in Houston. If the women of Delta Sigma Theta made a calendar of every single, this is what you all should do. I'm just going to put it out there. Have a list. You are the most organized people have ever asked me to give a speech. My God. I mean, this is like, you guys are so organized. Create an Excel spreadsheet of every member of the legislature that represents the district that you all represent of the alumni chapter, right? And then schedule Zoom calls with them. I will give you Camille, the Boris Miles chief of staff's cell phone number. You text her, she'll set it up tomorrow. They would love to talk to you. I'm serious. These people would like fall over backwards to talk to a group of really hyper organized professional women. My God, that's like politician gold.
Got it. And so question about just something that's happening in the Texas legislature that you mentioned earlier as well, as far as redistricting. Yeah. That the map is coming up, right, to do that. So how, outside of letting the elected officials that we believe represent us, that have our best self-interest, besides letting them know that we have their back, you also spoke to a magic number to get stuff done. What can we do to ensure that we don't have a flawed map? What pressure can we apply? What advocacy, what action can we take to ensure that that does not happen again?
I can answer this question one of two ways. I'm going to answer it both ways. I'm going to answer it from the perspective of the idealistic advocate who believes that all of us have an ethical, moral responsibility to do everything we possibly can to influence policy in a positive way on behalf of the communities in which we all live and purport to represent. Which is, yes, we can have an impact. You've got to get involved. The good thing about redistricting is that because the way the redistricting works is historically the hearings have happened all over the state. It's the one Senate committee that will be meeting all over the state. And also, I would urge people in this group to remember that the Senate chair of the redistricting committee is from Houston. So if you all care about this issue, Joan Huffman, who is a Republican, but is pretty reasonable, actually. I was on a phone call for an hour today with her legislative director. They're great in that office. They're very approachable, very nice, very kind of middle of the road for a Republican in Texas. And she's chairing the redistricting committee. So the obvious thing to be, if you wanted to do something, would be invite her to come talk to one of your meetings. I guarantee you that's never happened before. And I also pretty much guarantee you she'll agree to do it.
And just for one, what's her name again? So everybody watching can get that.
Yeah, Joan Huffman from Houston, former judge, state senator, probably the single most powerful person outside of the lieutenant governor and maybe the finance chair of the session in the Senate, is because she controls the maps, right? She controls everybody's kind of destiny.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's really good information. There's an opportunity.
There's a huge opportunity for you.
There's an opportunity there that we all should be looking into. Definitely. Just throwing it up. You said in about 10 years, this is a popcorn question. You said in about 10 years, that's when we could really expect Texas to flip. The optimist in me said, no, next year, 2 years from now.
2 months ago, I would have said a month. No,
yeah, the optimist in me is like, no, that's incorrect. That's incorrect. Nope, he's not telling the truth. But no, realistically, this is work that you do. You see this. Could you just kind of expand on that? Because I think there might have been, and briefly, because we're going to be wrapping up here, there might have been a false sense of security because everyone was super excited this election because we had a presidential election, and then we're also getting revved up thinking that we can also change this state. Why, based on your expertise, based on what you're seeing, why do you think it's going to take that much more work? I suspect one of the reasons was the straight ticket voting, which we kind of touched on.
Yes.
That was a huge loss, if you will. But why is that? Why is it going to take so much more work for the state to change power dynamics.
Voter suppression works.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at what happened in 2020, it's proof positive it works. And no one, I don't have to tell you guys this. I mean, who are they going after? Whose votes do they want the least? It's the people on this Zoom call, period. I mean, Black women in particular. If they could disenfranchise anybody, you're number one on the list. Make no mistake about it. What I thought was really interesting in this election that blew me away, to be honest, was the forgiveness that people were able to feel as soon as people voted against Trump. Then after that, they went back to Republican.
Right.
There was no connect. It was like there was no scarlet tea. Mm-hmm. There was no. So if you could still be Republican and not be considered to be part of that madness. Mm-hmm. And what troubled me the most, what kind of like took my breath away, was how well Trump did in border counties. I mean, if you look at the top 5 counties in the United States in which Trump gained over where Clinton was, 4 of those top 5 counties were in Texas, and every single one of them was on the border. Mm-hmm. So given that the Hispanic voting bloc in Texas is very pro-life, socially conservative, and very much buying into this argument of urban violence, which is they're trying to create a divide here. To be really clear, they ain't stupid what they're doing here. About making sure if Black Texans and Latino Texans vote the same, they lose. They have to break up the block, and that's how it's a divide and conquer strategy. And
thank you. That's exactly what I was about to say. So you think what it looks like is the divide and conquer strategy is taking hold. And so then on the inverse of that.
And if you think it's happening by chance,
mm-hmm.
if you think it's happening by chance, come live with me for a week.
Yeah.
Everything they do is calculated. They know what they're doing.
Good to know. Good to know. We already know that. I mean, we know that. We see that. But I think I always say it's a little, it adds a little more credibility when someone who's in the room and someone who is actually in the space can confirm what you can see from afar. So that's
what you see from afar is reality.
Yeah.
Don't forget that. Don't doubt yourself.
Yeah.
Don't doubt yourself. Trust your gut. Your gut's right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we want to thank you for this. You have dropped major gems, a lot of insight, and really some calls to action, specifically about coalition building, specifically about micro-targeting people in positions of power, and then also uplifting and pushing forward those people that we elected that we feel as though have our best interests at heart. So we really thank you and appreciate you for that. I want to open up the floor and space for the Vice President, Ms. Percy Kabir. Do you have a few remarks?
Yes, I have been energized and I have been charged to action with all of this information. I want to sincerely thank both Jason as well as yourself, Quentin, for being a part of this continuing learning that we are doing in order to empower us as an organization and as individuals for the state of Texas, so that we can all move forward in bringing up our agenda and supporting the individuals that we put in office. And so we truly appreciate this, and we look forward to our relationship building as you help us to bring more and more information to our communities, because we all know that education is key. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And this concludes our program. We definitely wish everyone well. Have a great and blessed night, and make sure you share this because it will be on replay on the Delta's Facebook page. Please share this so that other people can be informed and know what's going on. Everyone have a great night.